Welcome to The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker, co-hosted by the Director of Fighting for a Free Future, Harry Richer. Harry, who's joining us today?
Thank you, Steve. Today we have Saqib Bhatti joining us. He is the Conservative MP for Meriden and Solihull East. He was elected in 2019. Prior to that, he was a regional business leader, serving as the youngest person and the first Muslim to lead the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. He also set up Muslims for Britain and served on the board for Vote Leave. Saqib is a libertarian. He spent a lot of his career fighting for lower taxes, for freedom, for free markets, for free speech, things we all love on this programme. So it's wonderful to have you here.
Well, thank you. And that is the best introduction I've ever had.
Well, yeah, Saqib, I'm just wondering, how did you get yourself elected with a prospectus like that? Amazing.
I know. Look, it was a fantastic thing to be able to be. I was president of the Greater Birmingham Chambers, which covered Solihull, and so very close to home. My wife's from there as well, and you know they are my people.
Well, I learned something about you already. You've been riding a horse in your constituency. Tell me about the horses.
Yeah, so this complete quirk of coincidence. My predecessor, Dame Caroline Spellman, rides horses. She has 2 horses, and she used to chair the APPG for the horse, which I then took over. Great APPGs, dealt with so many important post-Brexit DEFRA issues, and then we often go riding together, mainly because I'm a cheapskate, and I get to ride her really nice horses for free. And
Absolutely
we go around
fabulous.
the constituency, and you know, a couple of hours whenever we go out and see people, and I think they're all a bit shocked to see the former MP and the current MP, you know, riding horses.
Not as shocked as they would be in Wickham.
Well, yeah, sure.
Now then, tell us about you. So business, what else have you done in business?
So I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I was at the LSE, did a law degree, then moved back to the West Midlands when everyone else was still moving to London. I qualified as a chartered accountant in Deloitte in their financial services practice, right at the height of the global financial crash. So I had the front row seat. I was working on Alliance in Leicester at the time when Santander came in over a weekend and took it over. After qualifying, got involved with my family business. My father was also a chartered accountant. I'd been helping out since I was 7 or 8, you know, helping out with bills and whatever, you know, parents get to do in self-employed businesses. And I was, you know, Deloitte, I was looking for the last £100 million. And then for my business, it was looking for the last £10. And I was dealing with family businesses, entrepreneurs, really. A lot of my politics and what I do now is born out of what I did in that business and understanding the motivations of entrepreneurs. Yeah. And then I got involved with Chambers of Commerce because my dad thought I'd get bored playing hockey and horse riding. I don't know why he thought that. And then I just went up through the ranks there. I ended up at one point sitting on 9 different boards. I became the president of the Asian Chamber of Commerce. And then in 2015, I came across... so I never really anticipated being a politician, actually. I thought maybe one day, you know, it'd be a nice thing to do. And in 2015, I met Daniel Hannan, now Lord Hannan. Yeah. And he said, have you thought about what role you're going to play in the Brexit debate? And I hadn't really, you know, obviously we knew it was coming. The referendum was all set. And I decided that I wanted to make the British Muslim argument for, or the pro-Asian argument, actually, you know, or ethnic minority argument for why leaving the EU was better for the ethnic minority communities of Britain. And we launched in 14th of January 2016.
I think that is how we met. I think that is
how we met. I thought
yeah,
so. Yeah, because I know you took our leaflets that we did, which were really positive, positive case and all that. Dan was amazing, you know, and you guys were amazing.
Well, I saw the issues in Wickham.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I love people wherever they come from as a rule, but you could see the injustice where British Asians would be really struggling to get grandma in to help mum with the newborn.
Yeah, yeah.
And I saw real misery happening there. Yeah. But, you know, European grandma would come and go as she saw fit. And that's lovely. Yeah. But the injustice of being treated so fairness. Different. Yeah.
And I remember we were in Alamarock Road, which is a really diverse area of Birmingham, and Channel 4 and Gary Gibbon come. And Gary's actually a great journalist, and we were going through shop to shop, and 95% of the shop owners were voting to leave. And Gary kept asking them what they thought of Nigel Farage at the time, and they kept saying, "Who's Nigel Farage?" It was just so fascinating. I remember there was a woman in a burqa, and Gary asked her what she thought, and she just comes out with this really strong black country accent, you know, and I'm gonna mess it up now, even though I'm from the area, and she said, you know, all I care about is the future of my children, you know, and you know. and I just thought, what a great moment of television actually that was, because it just showed that everyone was thinking about the future of the country. And then in the midst of all that, Gisela Stewart became chair of Vote Leave, and I knew her through my business days, and she asked me to come onto the national board, which was a great experience. It was where I met Dominic Cummings for the first time, and you really had a front row seat in some of the the most pivotal decisions that we made in this country. And yeah, so
so from there into Parliament.
Well, on Vote Leave Day, on polling day, I was in Birmingham doing all the media there. I think I left. We walked out of the ICC about 5:30 in the morning, and the guys who clean the streets were out from the night before, because it's it was on Broad Street, so the massive clubbing area. And I just looked to my friend. I said, we've just changed the world, and we just haven't realised it. And we then obviously everything happened. I got involved with Andy Street's campaign. I knew him. I was on the Let board. He was chair, and all throughout this time nationally, Brexit just wasn't getting done. And then I got on the candidates list, and it was just starting to niggle. And then 2016, I would have said I'm probably 10 years away. By the start of 2019, I probably said, maybe 2 years away. And by 5th of November, I was a candidate. And 13th of December, I was, I guess I was a Boris baby. Is that what we were? I don't know.
If you say so, add you to the list.
Does that make you a Cameron baby there?
Yeah. Maybe it does. So that's another story for another day.
And then you walk in on the 13th of December, and it's like starting school again.
Yeah.
Well, it's always interesting because in Parliament, because I'm in the 2019 Parliament for about 2 years, or working in Parliament for 2 years, and all of the new MPs join, and they have no idea what to do or where to go or how everything goes. No. What were your kind of first experiences like of Parliament?
So you get lost everywhere. It's like entering Hogwarts. That's what you do. But the weird thing was, I remember getting my locker and thinking, this really reminds me of my school locker. This is the most unrelatable story, I think, but I'm going to say it. So it was because Pugin, who designed the interior of Parliament, tested his designs on my old school, and so that's why it seems so weirdly familiar. So you're kind of going there, you're kind of getting lost all the time. Steve will remember it was 13th of December. Obviously, we had the whole Get Brexit Done. I think the bill had already got introduced pretty quickly. I think Christmas period was shortened. There was Matt Hancock starting to talk about this virus on the other side of the world. And frankly, we all probably thought we'd got through SARS and it didn't really affect us. So is it going to be that big a deal? And then, of course, it was a huge deal. And we come back in January, it's all anyone's talking about. And you don't get training for that. You don't get told how to deal with it. How do you mobilise your constituents to stay at home as it was and make sure you protect the businesses, etc. And I will say the early days actually were very cross-party. I remember Penny Mordaunt used to do those daily calls, and you had Lib Dems, Labour on there. We were all just trying to do the right thing by our constituents. But it was a weirdly bizarre time that you'll look back at, and my kids will probably think, "What are you talking about, Dad?" But
that of course that really dominated for those of you who came in 2019. So before we really get into the issues of the day, one more thing we haven't talked about. You're a family man, aren't you?
I am. I've got 2 kids. So I didn't wait around. So I got married in 2020. In a small period of time, you were allowed to get married. My mum wanted a massive Asian wedding, 800 people. I did a small COVID wedding of 27. So, until I had grandkids, I was not in her good books. And we had baby number 1 a year later, and we've got 2 now, and we're expecting number 3. So it is chaos in my house.
Amazing. Well, that's fantastic. So your youngest is 4. You were telling me earlier what your youngest says.
So the eldest, so he's 4. The eldest 4, and he said to me just yesterday he wants to be a member of Parliament, a scientist, and a daddy.
Boom.
And so and I'm not just making that up for the podcast. And I'm pretty gassed with that.
Well, you're obviously doing a fantastic job as a daddy. He wants to be a daddy.
Well,
now. So I represented thousands of British Muslims in Wickham, about 20% of my electorate. They were some of my very best supporters and friends. And I feel I know them very well and know the issues very well. But just to test with you, because I used to go to mosque as often as I needed to go to mosque to support the community. Do you go to church?
I'm going to get in trouble now. I go to church probably more than I go to a mosque, to be honest. So I'm going to get in trouble with my mum at the moment. So we've got Yeah, I mean, Steve, you and I spoke about this so many times actually when we were in Parliament, and about the great things that the British Muslim community and the British Asian community actually brings to the country. And so I really do relate to the church-going community in my constituency because, of course, fundamentally we believe many of the same things. I believe whatever your faith is, fundamentally we should be good people, we should be kind, we should be generous, we should take care of the most vulnerable in our society, and we can agree on that. And you know, it's probably why my Anglican best friend and I have never fallen out, basically.
Do you know, I've stood many times in a mosque and said we all believe in one God, but we don't need to discuss the theology of that one God either then or today on this podcast.
Well, I'll tell you, I did, because I used to run Andy Street's campaign between 2017 and 2019, and I remember he was fantastic, and he still is in terms of engaging with different communities. That's the only way you win that election in the West Midlands. And I remember him going to a mosque, and you could hear a pin drop as he talked about the future of their children.
Yeah.
It wasn't about foreign policy. It wasn't about anything else. It was about school places, opportunity.
Yeah.
And he just got it.
So let's talk about that, because this is really important, and a thing we've discussed before, that actually people are united around a positive future. And one of the things I've been really worried about is the demonisation of Muslims because of some really big controversies. So let's tip into that serious stuff. Grooming gangs.
Yes.
I listened on my way here to Dominic Frisby, an actor, reading out the transcript of a court, and I'm not going to say what he said. It's available online. Absolute depravity, the kind of sadism that repulses us all.
Yeah.
I am certain that the vast majority of British Muslims, British Pakistanis, are as disgusted as anyone by this kind of depravity.
Absolutely.
And why is it then that we see people failing to acknowledge this opportunity to unite that community along with everybody else in condemning the evil that is amongst us all? Why do we end up with people seeking to condemn the whole group?
So look, it's going to sound so silly me saying this, but from the off, but I'm going to say this. A paedophile is a paedophile. Okay, from the way I see it, it doesn't really matter to me about ethnicity or colour of skin. A paedophile is a paedophile, and most British Muslims, certainly from my experience, don't have a clue that any of this has happened or has been going on. So they are as bemused as you were just now as you posed the question. The reality is, look, there has been in the grooming gangs, there has clearly been a demographic which we can't deny, and we shouldn't deny that, by the way. So it has been largely British Pakistani males who have conducted this. I know Sajid Javid, I call him Saj. When he was Home Secretary, he called it out quite rightly because we can't shy away from that. This has clearly happened, and more stories are coming out, and fundamentally. From my point of view, what's happened here is that these heinous men have taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable girls. I actually think there's a broader piece here, which is that there is clearly they took advantage of lots of white working class girls or vulnerable girls who are white, but I actually think there's probably huge amounts of British Muslim girls who've been taken advantage of, because paedophiles are paedophiles, right? They don't discriminate like that, and I suspect what we will find out is that there are plenty of British Muslim girls who haven't come forward, perhaps because they're worried about the impact in communities, or they're embarrassed, etc. They haven't had the same avenues of talking, and that's why I think we need a national inquiry. I think we need one.
And you've called for a national inquiry.
I've called for one. I've called for one twice from the dispatch box. I was covering equalities, and the first one was to Jess Phillips. I found her response incredibly patronising. It's called it for a second time in the national inquiry after the Louise Casey review. So Labour had to do an about turn, and it was Seema Malhotra at the time. And my worry was this was all going to get brushed under the carpet, which I think is basically, I feel like they're weak on this.
For me, none of this is about Jess Phillips, but I was a bit surprised because over the period I was in Parliament, I watched Jess stand up and give Conservatives an extremely hard time, as if we didn't care about violence against women and girls, and then she didn't support an inquiry. The thing that I'm really concerned about, first and foremost, of course, victims.
Yeah.
But how did these victims end up becoming subjected? The cover-up. I'm really concerned that that the rule of law hasn't been applied here, that people have been treated differently because of concerns about race. Have you seen that? What do you think may have gone on?
I think there are huge amounts of stories already coming out where, so on our side, in the Conservative side, I've had, Robbie Moore's done a great job on this, for example, who he's spoken about how, social workers have attended weddings with the groomer and the 13-year-old girl. I mean, what planet was that allowed, right? And the reason I get so animated about this, right, is not just because, I'm British Muslim and Pakistani heritage. I've got, soon to have 3 sons. I hope to have a daughter one day. And my wife will hear that and get shocked. But I don't want my sons growing up with aspersions being cast on them. And I want my daughter to grow up in a safe world where the law is applied equally. Yeah. So, this is about what's right and wrong. And actually, I remember when I asked the question in Parliament, I won't name the Labour minister, but a Labour minister came up to me and said that basically, Jess was really surprised that you asked that question. Now, I don't know if Jess asked that question.
She was surprised that you asked for an inquiry.
And I'm going to say, Jess did not say this to me. I don't know if she felt that, but certainly this minister felt empowered enough to come up to me and say why. And I said what I'm saying to you. I said, look, we need the truth. The truth needs to come out, and if there are issues within the British Pakistani community or broader, we need that truth to come out, and that needs to be dealt with.
Honestly,
those girls deserve justice.
Absolutely.
And we cannot shy away from that. We cannot be oversensitive about this.
I think if people turned a blind eye to this kind of depravity and didn't prosecute because of concerns about race, then they themselves should face justice.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think that's something that needs to be spoken about a little bit more, because you read these stories and you are just shocked that they could ever happen in modern Britain. And then you read the fact that social workers or police workers, or policemen rather, and policewomen were sometimes involved, whether it was ferrying individuals to certain areas, or these victims would report it to the police, and the police would either ignore them or take advantage of the victims. It comes across as mass institutional failure. How do you think we rebuild not only trust in the police and trust in the social worker system, but clearly something's gone so wrong that does the entire system need to be overhauled?
I think the truth needs to come out first, right? We don't actually know what's gone on in a meaningful way. We've had local inquiries. And why has Keir Starmer shied away from it? Jess Phillips was at the dispatch box, said we did not need a national inquiry, right? And then Louise Casey does her report. She's obviously someone of great respect. And now they are saying they're going to do it, and it's all falling apart. And I don't think there's enough respect for the victims, actually. I think fundamentally it all comes back to the victims. Yeah. And if we're not doing that for them, or the government is not doing that for them, to be precise, the serious questions need to be asked. And actually, when you get to the bottom of it, what you will probably find out is where there's been institutional failures, we deal with that. We need to ask why. And by the way, I don't want to inquiry the last decades and, all those things. This has to be to the point, quick, so survivors can get justice, and we need the truth. And if someone has deliberately covered it up or ferried people around us, I mean, that is just unacceptable, right? This is completely unacceptable.
We need to move on to some other extremely difficult issues. Yeah. But before we do, what would you say to those people who have slipped into thinking that the problem is Muslims or the problem is Asian people of a Pakistani heritage? What would you say to them?
I think I'm seeing more and more people say, first of all, that it's religiously motivated. That is, for me, when I look at that, my response is that's categorically untrue. And I hope the data and the evidence will back me up on that. But with those people who think it's British Muslims as a whole, it just goes against everything we are as a British society. You've got British Muslims who are out there working hard. If there are moderate Muslims who are afraid to speak up, then we as the legislators and national figures need to give them the power and the confidence to speak up and give them the avenue to do so. Yeah. British Muslims are not homogenous as a society. There are people from all over the world who live in this country, or of heritage from all over the world who live in this country who are British Muslim, and I can relate to some, and there are others who I probably won't relate to because of their background.
We'll come on to that,
which is what I'm sure we'll talk about. So look, it is lazy to do so. It is offensive at times, and actually we need to show the British Muslim respect, and the British Muslim community needs to also stand up and speak up, right?
And show that they too are united in condemning depravity.
Of course.
Because of course,
I could talk to you about flags, for example, just to segue a little bit. But I did a piece in Con Home a few weeks ago, And I did not grow up, I was born in 85, so I did not grow up in the 80s when the National Front were using the flag and then beating people up and for their ethnicity, etc. So for me, my relationship with the flag is very different. My memories of the flag are very different. My memories of the St. George's flag, every time I think of it, the images of Michael Owen running past the Argentinian defence and me screaming at the TV going, get in and saying, probably shouting some profanities as well.
Yeah.
And so, that there is... society. We're not a homogenous society.
So you mentioned the football.
Yeah.
What did you think of Aston Villa?
I thought it was a terrible decision. I was very vocal on it for two major reasons, and I spoke about it in Parliament. I thought it patronised the British Muslim community as though they were thinking as one. That I've got plenty of messages from people saying, why have we been dragged into this? The British Muslim community is getting tired and jaded by this kind of othering. But it was pushed forward by local politicians and the local parliamentarian, and I just think it was completely wrong to do so. And then also, by the way, then the othering in this case, of course, actually happened with the Jewish community, and those Israeli fans, who many of them will be Jewish, and if not the majority, many of them will be British Jews actually. And what that decision actually signalled to the world, and I say this as the former president of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, is that Birmingham or the West Midlands cannot protect its Jewish community. That is a bad look, and that we cannot host major events, even though we had the Commonwealth Games a few years ago, and this is a football match. I think the police made the wrong decision on this. I suspect, and I can only suspect on this, the local politicians involved scared them, and while they may have had intelligence, but we can stop people from travelling, we can do bubble structures to make sure fans get on buses and protect them. We can have exclusion zones, so if people want to protest, which is their right, they can do so freely, but away from where there might be trouble hotspots. And I thought it was a massive letdown. It goes contrary to what I believe Britain should be, what the West Midlands should be, which is a free nation where you can practice your faith, you can enjoy a football match, irrespective of where you come from, and you can be, the libertarian in me comes out and says, this really just went against everything I believe in.
Yeah. I mean, speaking to my friends about it, I'm Jewish, and as soon as that came out, we were very much just saying Birmingham's now a no-go zone for British Jews, and that is just how it felt to ordinary British Jews. I mean, ultimately, if the police can police Millwall versus West Ham, they can handle a small group of fans coming from Israel. Yeah. And it just gets onto the point of, and we are seeing this with a lot of the independent pro-Gaza MPs, this kind of rise of sectarianism within the UK. Yeah. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
So I think if I look at that example, the narrative changed. And by the way, I don't blame the British Jewish community for feeling like that at all, right? You've had that terrorist attack in Manchester a few weeks ago, and then this decision comes out, and I think I'm angry that this decision got taken, because it is wrong on just so many levels. And fundamentally, after the Manchester attack, I did Politics Midlands, and I said, look, we need to put our arm around the Jewish community. I times 10 that now, right? Because the West Midlands has always been a welcoming place. Most my constituents that I spoke to said it just makes us look really bad.
Birmingham University has a massive Jewish population.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I know some of them, and actually, but it fundamentally goes back to, who are we as a nation, right? We should be proud in our values. I want free speech like the next person. I want the freedom to protest. I love having a free press. I love the rule of law. There is no country in the world that has our values. There's just no country in the world, right? And I include America in that. We are a front runner on this. So when things like this happen, it massively destabilizes.
Well, yeah, the best of America is derived from the best of us, right? And I think even Trump's done that. But right, so I want to get into something which it's very pertinent to you, because I've seen in Wickham that the conflict in Gaza has come really home to British politics. In Wickham, we had a Respect Party candidate and an independent Gaza candidate, and I've seen that all nuance has quit the horizon. Yeah. I'm afraid I'm cursed. I can see both sides. I can see that innocent Palestinians have suffered terribly and unjustly, and perhaps have for a long time. But equally, there's no escaping for me the absolute horror of what was done on October the 7th.
Yeah.
But what I've been amazed by, and I think this is, if one of our really major concerns here is that the decent majority of British Muslims are being othered, I think what isn't helping is when British Muslims appear to neglect the horror of what was done to Israelis on that day. What do you think is going on there with that perception and the way people communicate? Why is there a blindness to the horror that was perpetrated?
So, look, Steve, I don't think there's a blindness, but I do think, because when I talk to British Muslims, when they come to my surgeries, for example, they will say, what happened on October the 7th was really bad. But then it starts with a but, and it starts talking about what went before and what's happening since. And actually, look, you can't get away from what's happening on our screens. Okay, number one, right? So you can see, I understand why the anger is there, but the question of how, as legislators, again, how do we move society forward, but British Muslim forward is a massive one, right? And largely, look, I'm a conservative, so I think the British Muslim community has to pick itself up and move forward. But the truth is, as I said on the football stuff, you can freely protest about Gaza and feel strongly about it, right? But you can't. You shouldn't lose sight of the fact that and you can want justice there, what justice you want. You can lobby your parliamentarian about it. You can go do TV interviews.
But there's a limit, right?
You can write social media.
There's a limit.
But
no death threats. I bet you've had death threats.
I've had loads. I've had loads of death threats because I speak up on this. And there will be, and it's difficult, basically, right? Because for me, I deal with it. I knew eyes open when I walked into this job what I may face. I wasn't the only one. I've not been the worst receiver. If you're a woman in politics, you get it worse and over different issues. I think the blindness actually comes from the left, if I'm honest with you. And I think the progressive left have hijacked the issue. And I'll probably get lots. You'll probably get lots of interaction on social media for me for saying this. But I could give you an evidence of this. So when the Manchester attacks happened, the Gaza protest still went ahead. Despite where was the decency? And fair play to Shabana for calling that out and saying it's un-British. Where was the decency? People had lost lives. There's a whole community in the fear. You can wait a few days and protest, right? You can wait a week.
It was the thing that shocked me the most on that day because it was Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. I was fasting, praying, so I only heard about the attacks later in the afternoon. And what shocked me the most was then after the fast was out and after I used electricity properly again, going through my social media feed and seeing the fact that they were protesting at major stations, whether they were in London, Liverpool, other areas,
unacceptable.
Hours after British Jews had been murdered. And there was a sense of, and you said it really nicely, against all British values, against British civility, just against British civility. You can have passion on an issue, but the fact that there is just a lack of concern and care is what's so painful, I think, there.
Yeah, and it is painful, right? And it's painful for me to hear.
Yeah, I say painful from my own experience.
But it's painful for me to hear you go through that experience, actually, because, I've been to a Jewish school where you have children going through drills if there's a lone wolf attack. There's synagogues, the amount of security that they have out there, right? And, these are not unjustified, right, as we saw in Manchester. And we all, as British citizens, should feel that pain of our fellow Jewish brethren, right? And you have to do that. And yet, when I spoke, this was after the Gaza vote. Yeah.
After one of the ceasefire votes.
The ceasefire vote, which the SNP had engineered to give the Labour Party a headache.
Yeah,
right?
And the speaker didn't help.
The speaker didn't help at that time, but I took great umbrage to the British Muslim community being used as a tool and their anger being weaponised by the hard left. And that's basically what you see. Because if you'd walked out of Parliament that day, there were loads of signs with Socialist Workers' Party and all this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. There is legitimate debate to be had about what you do about the future of Palestine. But lots of those decisions are happening without us because, I think David Lammy's been really weak on that. I haven't seen Yvette Cooper do much on that.
I was actually wondering where she's been.
Yeah, I don't know, actually, right? And we're just following the UN line. If we've got a problem about aid, right, and we want aid to get to Palestine or Gaza, if it was Churchill was here, I'm pretty sure there'd be some aircraft carriers going down there and, and you can, as decent human beings, we can lobby for that. But I also, if you also had a terrorist attack like the 7th of October happen to you, I don't know if I would be, having a different reaction to what the Israelis did and going into Gaza, because Hamas clearly want their destruction. There is just no future here.
But
where
this
I see
is
Hamas
so.
surviving.
I listened to you say that, and I agree with what you've said. But I think it's going to have consequences for you when British Muslims hear what you've said, because what I've been really surprised by is that some of even my most moderate and thoughtful friends have had views of a stridency on this issue, which I've not expected. And I can see why when you look at the long history, I can understand why they come to their perspective. Yeah. But here's the thing that really will come to the crunch for all of us is radicalisation and the risk of radicalisation. I'm really concerned that in the prevailing environment, there is a much higher risk of radicalisation than we have seen for a while. What's your take on radicalisation and what can be done about it?
I think the risk is there. We've seen it, and it's ebbed and flowed, and as different things have happened. Largely, we actually had a pretty good decade. I mean, I talk post 2010, and the Conservative Party did huge amounts of engagement. We had British Muslims come forward for Parliament. Since then we've had a British Muslim Home Secretary and a Chancellor. Boris was good, David Cameron was good. Steve, you did loads of work locally. We are all going to have to roll our sleeves up and, recreate interfaith work, because that's fallen off a cliff, right? I was talking to the Jewish community in my patch a few weeks ago before the Manchester attack.
I've heard of groups of Jewish and Muslim people who've been sitting down together trying to understand one another's perspectives, who've had to just stop talking to one another in the course of this conflict because they just ran out of things to say in the course of the bloodshed. The thing that's really worrying me is what on earth do we say, particularly to young people who genuinely believe, however wrongly, that there is a genocide in progress in Gaza. How do we reconnect with them? And I don't know. Because if that's what they've come to believe, if they've genuinely come to believe that there's a genocide going on and that the UK's authorities and political leaders don't care, and that's their perspective, how do we somehow get through to them that I hear what you're saying, but I genuinely don't believe that there's a genocide in progress. And it's not about not caring, it's about not thinking that's what's happening. But I don't know how to actually land that message so that people will even hear us say it.
So I think there's a number of things there. Number one, you can't pander or patronise the British Muslim community, right? And Keir Starmer's done that. The whole statehood recognition stuff that was going on, it didn't help with Donald Trump's ceasefire stuff. It probably undermined it. Hamas are looking for a way out for themselves. And the moment the ceasefire came in, by the way, and this was the other point I wanted to make, the ceasefire came in, Hamas called up 7,000 fighters, right? They started killing other Palestinians. I didn't see any protests about that.
Right? I mean, the videos were awful. You saw, I saw the ones of people on their knees, Hamas fighters with the armband, just shooting people in the street.
And so there's retribution going on, right? And so you give a great example of that. And so the only way, Steve, to answer your question is you can't patronise them, because it doesn't. By the way, I doubt Keir Starmer's gained any political capital for doing that, and it's probably undermined our negotiating position on a two-state solution, right? Which I'm still a massive believer on. And so that's number one. Number two, we have to engage those young people. We cannot leave them to the wayside. People can feel strongly about Gaza, but look. Let the if the ICJ are going to do rulings, let's see what that comes in. We as a country, we don't have a choice in that. We'll have to deal with all those things. But the reality is, those people, we cannot leave them to the wayside, because it creates a problem for the future. And still, by the way, the one slight pushback I'll give you, there are huge amounts of British Muslim young people who are doing all sorts of great things up and down the country. They need to feel part of the process, not outside the process. And, I am a fundamentally optimistic person. There's a reason why I've made it this far in life in all the things I've done. It's because I refuse to give up. And I will not give up on the British Muslim community.
Likewise, Saqib Bhatti, thank you very much indeed. This is Fighting for a Free Future. It's been an absolute joy to have Saqib on. He's a great man, and it's been a real privilege to have you here.
Thanks.
We hope you're enjoying The Insurgency with Steve Baker. We've had so many wonderful guests on the show, and we hope you're enjoying all the content we're putting out.
We also have our Substack and a community and educational programmes, but you can also get merchandise. If you would like a Fighting for a Free Future mug or baseball cap or, yes, T-shirt explaining that taxation is worse than theft, please visit our store. We've just had a fantastic interview, and there will be an extended version available on the Substack.